WMI and CIM. WMI, docs, and the repository. We're going to be starting a conversation on a whole new chunk of technology within Windows and Windows PowerShell that most folks are accustomed to referring to as Windows Management Instrumentation, although we've got a new word, Common Information Model, or CIM, that's going to start cropping up a lot more often in those conversations. We'll start by talking about the repository, something you may have called or heard others call the WMI repository, but I'm going to drop the word WMI, which I'll explain in a sec. And I'm going to show you some ways to explore that. Unfortunately, there's no central list of all the goodness that actually lives in WMI or in the repository, so you'll have to kind of get used to spelunking, exploring as if it was a labyrinth network of caves, which is not a completely inaccurate analogy. Not all of the repository is documented, but when it is, I'll give you some tips for finding that documentation. It is not, unfortunately, in PowerShell's help system. You're going to have to go to a search engine most of the time. And then there's an important architectural discussion we need to have, which is WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation, versus CIM, the Common Information Model. Fight. These are two different ways of getting at the repository, one of which is actually deprecated and on the way out. The other one is the new one, the way forward. So you definitely want to make sure you're on the right side of that when you start investing brain power in learning these technologies. I want to start by briefly showing you where you can start to look at WMI. So the whole idea is that all of the management information on your computer or on any computer that is exposed through WMI keeps that information in something called the repository. Now, in the past, it was very common to refer to this as the WMI repository, but for a couple of reasons that will become apparent over the next few nuggets, I'm just going to call it the repository. I'm going to kind of take the word WMI out of it. But let's kind of just get a glance at this thing. I'm going to open a blank MMC, and we will add the WMI control snap-in. I'm going to wind up showing you several different ways of getting at this information, but this is one I like because, in part, it allows you to connect to the local computer or to another computer. Now, that's a very important concept. Different computers have got different stuff in their repository. A domain controller, for example, is going to have different things on it than a client computer. A computer with SQL Server installed might have different things that relate to SQL Server, which would not be present on a computer that didn't have it. So as you're exploring WMI, it's important to keep in mind that not every computer is exactly the same. For that matter, not even every version of Windows is the same. WMI has been around since, NT 4.0 Service Pack 3, and obviously there's been stuff added to the operating system in all that time, and so each successive version of Windows has different things in WMI. Sometimes the things in WMI are even different from version to version, even if they exist. For example, take the bit of WMI that represents your computer's microprocessors. Now, in XP and earlier, which were all operating systems invented before the creation of multi-core processors, the processor representation is for a logical processor. So if you have a single socket dual core machine, you're going to have two of those things. On Windows Vista and later, they made a modification to that. So now you only get one of those per socket, and there's a little property that tells you how many cores it has. So it's important to understand that even the behavior of something can change throughout different versions. Anyway, I'm going to connect this WMI control to the local computer. And you pull this up, and you see the little triangle drop-down thing, and you think, oh, great, there's stuff here to explore. And you click it, and it goes away. Well, that's okay. Sometimes you have to click on, oh, well, that's not really useful either, is it? The trick with this is that it's mainly designed to let you configure a few properties, and you have to get into those properties. You can back up and restore the repository. You can configure a couple of advanced things like what the default namespace is going to be. And I think the useful bit is this security tab. Not because I want to change the security. I never do. It tends to mess things up. But because it provides this little tree view of the namespaces. So just as this little icon implies, a namespace in the repository is just a container. It's really just a way of logically orienting or organizing different things. For example, root CIM v2, that's Common Information Model version 2, Contains a lot of the core stuff that relates to the operating system, your computer hardware. You notice over here on the Advanced tab, root CIM v2 is the default namespace, meaning if you don't specify a namespace, whatever you're looking for, Windows will look in root CIM v2 to find it. There's Security Center. This is some interesting stuff in here we'll play with in just a moment. WMI has its own section. There's Microsoft, which expands into multiple things. There's interop. There's network access protection, policy, resultant set of policy. There's a whole bunch of different things in here. And again, they're going to be different on every computer you play with. So this isn't a bad place to kind of start your core level exploration of what in WMI exists on a particular computer. There is an even easier and frankly better way to explore WMI. And if you hop onto PowerShell.org and in the little search bar type WMI Explorer, you'll find a nice article about a little free tool that was written by Mark von Oskro, who is a PowerShell MVP, also known as the PowerShell guy. And this is actually a script written in PowerShell that lets you explore WMI. So you can download this thing. I have actually got it on my computer already. Now it is a script, so I need to make sure that my system execution policy is set to allow scripts. And then I think I put this in my C drive. There it is. So let's just run that. And this will take a little bit of time sometimes to get up and running, depending on what's on your computer. Let's see if we can get on screen here. So dot means connect to the local computer. You can see how this would let you connect to another computer also. We'll just connect to the local one. And we get the root namespace. So this is the same kind of tree display, just without the benefit of a folder icon. So let's take a look around at what's in here. Root CIM v2. If I double click this, it says it will retrieve the classes from there. You can see down here on the status bar, it's retrieving the classes. So if a namespace is an organizational thing, what it contains are classes. And you can see as we get in here, you'll find things like Win32 BIOS, Win32 CD-ROM drive. One of my favorites is down here in the T's. Let's see if we can find it. Win32 tape drive. So a couple of things. These classes represent a management component that your computer could have. For each actual occurrence of this, you will have one instance. So I have no tape drives attached to my computer. So if I double click this and click on instances, you'll see that I have none because I have no tape drives. So let's scroll back up to the top a bit. A neat thing about this is they are alphabetical. So if you kind of take a guess at what it is you think you want to play with, like I think I'm going to get the BIOS serial number. So let's start in the B's and see if we find something that looks like BIOS. Double click. It is trying to pull the help file down, so sometimes that'll work, sometimes it sometimes it won't. Looks like it is on my computer. And then under instances, we'll double click this again. Oh. Get instances. There we go. You can see all the information that's in here. So I do have an instance, a single instance of Win32 BIOS. And each of these columns kind of corresponds to a table you might see in Windows PowerShell. So there's a property called BIOS version and caption, and those properties are also listed up here. And you can uncheck them to take them out of this table if you want to, telling me it has 27 properties. Let's explore a little bit further afield because I want to point out something. These Win32 prefixes are something that Microsoft probably regrets. I am on a 64-bit computer. The Win32 really has nothing to do with 32-bit or 64-bit. In fact, this is the only namespace, root CIM v2, only namespace where you'll see classes with that prefix. You'll also see classes with a CIM prefix, Common Information Model. In this namespace, the general approach is if you see something with CIM, look to see if there's something with Win32 that's more specific. CIM will be kind of the vendor-neutral generic version. And then if there's a Win32 equivalent, that'll be the more Microsoft-specific version. But you will normally only see those prefixes, CIM and Win32, in this namespace. In other namespaces, Microsoft didn't follow that convention. A good example, let's go to Root Security Center 2. So it looks like there's a bunch of classes. These ones with the double underscore are system classes. Usually you won't need to ever play with them. So we'll scroll down till we get to, gosh, there's a lot of those. There's really only 3 things in here we care about. Now, you guys know what Security Center is, right? It's the thing that shows you the little green and red shields if your anti-spyware is up to date, if your antivirus is up to date, if your firewall is turned on. Well, that information actually comes from WMI. It comes out of the repository through this class: anti-spyware product, antivirus product, firewall product. Let's double-click that. Now, this is a case where the Help tab is not showing me anything interesting, probably because, unfortunately, most WMI classes are not documented very well. I'm going to show you documentation information in just a sec. This tool is a great way to shortcut to it. Most of the stuff in Root CIM v2, which is where we started, that was the Win32 BIOS and so forth, most of that stuff is documented. Outside of that namespace, almost nothing is. But here's how you deal with it anyway. Get instances. So 5 properties of this class. It looks like it's not showing me any instances installed. Let's see if I have an antivirus product. Nope. Anti-spyware product. I do. I have Windows Defender. Here's its GUID. Here's its product state. So there's all this information that you've got to play with in here. There are other tools. Sapien Technologies actually makes a WMI Explorer that caches your repository information in a searchable form. So instead of having to do this guess thing, like, okay, how do I find out something about my antivirus? Well, let's start here in Root CIM v2, because Don said that's where all the core stuff is. So I'm going to look for CIM, I don't know, antivirus, I guess. And I don't see anything. No, so now let's look for Win32 antivirus. This whole kind of trial and error approach to finding things in WMI is exactly how you do it. Unfortunately, there's just no better way because there's no central list. Now, if you pick up that tool, it's a free tool from Sapien, by the way, I believe. Their WMI Explorer does kind of cache this and create a searchable central directory, and it can do it for remote computers as well. So you can get a little bit of a keyword search built in that way. I'm also going to show you some tricks in PowerShell that might help a little bit. So anyway, once you've gotten these things, you can look at the instances. Some of these have methods too, some of these classes. Let's get down to the S's, Win32 service. Click, get instances, 150 instances. These are all the services running on my computer. Let's see if they have any methods that it wants to share. Now, the help is going to help me with that. In fact, let me just show you where this documentation is. I've got one of them pulled up here. The way you typically find these, if you know a class name, so stop trying to load. If you know a class name and you punch it into your favorite search engine, it should pop up with one of the first couple of hits being an msdn.microsoft.com page. If there's official documentation, that's what you're going to find. So I'm going to try and open this in a different tab because I also want to show you antivirus product. And if I punch in WMI to kind of try and limit my search results just to the thing that might have to do with that class, let's see if anything even comes up. Yeah, so there's some blogs where people are talking about it with VB script. That's pretty old, 2008. But there's not actually any official Microsoft documentation. And unfortunately, that's what you're going to find happening with an awful lot of these WMI classes. You see, there was a time when Microsoft had folks running around internally screaming, use WMI, and there were evangelists internally. They were trying to convince all the product teams to use WMI. And the product team said, great, we're going to do it. What are the standards? Use WMI. Should we document it? Use WMI. So we should just do whatever we want and not actually write it down or document it. Use WMI. Okay, go away, you're annoying. Unfortunately, that's what happened. Now, Microsoft does have a solution to this going forward, but we'll get to that in just a sec. Let's see what this Win32 service pulled up. Oh, that's attractive. Their website's clearly on its A game today. Give that a little reload and see if it helps. There we go. So the official documentation page is good to look at for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's going to show me all the methods, the things I can make this class do. It shows me I can modify a service, I can change the start mode, I can use this to create and delete services, I can get the security descriptor except on Server 2003 and XP. I can pause it, resume it, do lots of stuff. Each property is then given a description, so I can tell what each of these properties, like if, let's say you're looking at this and you're like, I see this property called start name. What does that mean? It's the account name that the service runs under. It's the logon account. All right, that's good to know. Then at the bottom, another useful piece of information here is the minimum. When did this start to exist? Well, it existed in Windows XP, Windows Server 2003 and later, although you'll notice things have been added to this since then, like that set security descriptor we just looked at. Here's the namespace it lives in, root sim v2. So it gives you a decent amount of information and a link to the higher level stuff. So you can start to get a categorized breakdown. Again, I really wish Microsoft had documented this for everything, but they didn't, so we just have to live with it. All right, what are some ways that you can work with this inside Windows PowerShell? I'm going to close this script of his. You got a couple of ways. First of all, let's start with this. Get WMI object. Let's say you do know a namespace. And let's admit it. Even if you have to use that WMI control snap-in, there's a fairly limited number of namespaces. It is not an infinite number. Namespace root simv2 minus list. Just show me everything. Now that's interesting. I hit Control-C to interrupt that because it's a lot of information and you probably don't want to have to scroll through that. Let's say you're looking for something to do with disks. Where name like star disk. This isn't a keyword search. It's just going to try and match on the class name. So the less specific you are here, the more results you'll get. I don't want to put disks because that's going to prevent me from getting anything if in fact it just says disk somewhere. So I'm just going to hit this. Much shorter list. I've got a CIM logical disk, but I've also got a Win32. Whenever I get one of each, the Win32 is probably the more specific version. So this is another good way to try and find things in WMI. You can do this with remote computers as well. In fact, in the next nugget, we're going to look at that get WMI object command in a lot more detail so that you can kind of see a little bit more what he actually does and is capable of and what his options are. And we also need to talk a little bit about some architecture, and we need to talk a little bit about why I'm not using the word WMI repository. So what we've got here is what I will call the repository. And it's got all kinds of juicy stuff living in it. There are really these days two ways to communicate with that thing. There is a WMI service, and this exists for all practical purposes on XP or 2003 and later. It is on NT4 OSP3, but I'm hoping we can move past that. You communicate with this using remote procedure calls, which is an implementation of Distributed Component Object Model, DCOM. Now this is pretty old stuff. One of the problems with Windows management instrumentation is that Microsoft created it before the Distributed Management Task Force had finalized all the standards around the Common Information Model. And so WMI is a very Microsoft proprietary implementation. RPCs are a very Microsoft proprietary protocol. Getting RPCs through a firewall is a very, very, very painful process. They'll connect initially on like port 139, and then they want to take the conversation off to some other random port. Actually gets a little bit difficult. If you are playing with the Windows firewall, there's a remote management exception that you can enable, which uses stateful inspection so that RPCs will work. Anyway, it's messy. What we have going forward, though, starting in PowerShell version 3, is CIM. So this is in PowerShell version 3 and later. This communicates over WSMan, which uses the WinRM service, which we just spent several nuggets talking about. Both of those communicate with the exact same repository. So they're both capable of accessing the same information. There's actually now two set of commands, the old WMI commands, which use the first model, and the new CIM commands. Caveat being, the new CIM commands provide, I think, in a lot of cases, an easier way of getting at the information. Remember, it's the same information. These just, I think, provide a little bit better performance, a little bit better syntax. They're just a little friendlier. They're also capable of talking the old DCOM protocol for backward compatibility. So you can start switching over to using these exclusively because they can talk to your old computers and your new computers, but the commands themselves only come with PowerShell version 3. Keep that in mind. Now, it kind of, from there, it almost doesn't matter what you use. I think the thing you need to remember at this point is that Microsoft is no longer investing in the old stack. This is dead. It's deprecated. Now that means the command still exists in the new versions of the software. It still exists in the new versions of Windows, but the company's not investing in it anymore. There's going to be no improvements. There's not going to be better performance. There's not going to be changes to it. This is the way forward. So it's probably smart that you don't take too much more investment in the old WMI commands and instead start using the CIM commands. Remember, they're backward compatible, and we're going to play with that all over the place. You're going to really love it. But it's definitely the way forward, so it's worth your time to start learning those things. So two different sets of technologies. We're going to cover each of those in a separate nugget. So we'll cover the old WMI way first, and then we'll cover the CIM way. We'll talk about filtering, we'll talk about queries, we'll talk about all sorts of fun little cool stuff around this entire technology. And in most cases, I'm going to show you both the old WMI command ways and the new CIM command ways so that you've got some flexibility. I just want you to know that you really need to be focusing on the new CIM commands as the thing to really invest in. At this point, you should know what the repository is, even if you've referred to it as the WMI repository in the past. Let's drop WMI and just start calling it the repository. You've seen some techniques for exploring it, and as I said, unfortunately, exploring it is really the way to find out what's in there. Now, Microsoft's kind of solution going forward, and I should make sure you know this, is to make it so that you don't have to interact directly with the repository as much. You're going to find a lot of commands out there, and here's a great example. This is even in PowerShell version 2, get hotfix. Inside, this just uses WMI or CIM or something. It queries the repository. But because it's a commandlet, it's got documentation, it's consistent, it's discoverable using help and get command. So by wrapping WMI in commandlets, Microsoft makes WMI and the repository a little bit easier for us to use. In the meantime, though, you still need to know where to find documentation, and search engines are your best friend for those individual classes. And we also spent some time talking about WMI versus CIM, what the difference is, which one you should be investing in going forward, and which one is kind of old, deprecated, and on the way out. Although you still may use it because it is in the versions of Windows that you probably have deployed. The CIM stuff was introduced in PowerShell version 3. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.